The diner falls silent for a second, when the sound of a ceramic cup shattering against tile rings out like a gunshot. But the waitress just glares at the man she's berating. "Look, sir." She snaps, her voice sharp and cold like steel scraping glass. "You can't sit there all day, ordering one coffee and scaring off real customers. Either buy something or leave." Her apron is crisp, lips pressed thin with impatience. But the man across from her doesn't move. His hands tremble slightly as he reaches for his wallet, stained and frayed from years of use. "I'll pay," he mutters, voice low, gravelly, steady, in the way someone speaks when they've been through worse. He's in his late 60s, maybe 70 white, with a lean, wiry frame and a jawline that looks like it could have been chiseled by hard winds and long wars. His white hair is closely cropped. His left eye droops slightly, and his right leg rests stiff and awkward under the table, braced with a heavy orthopedic support. He wears an old brown jacket, sleeves too short for his long arms, and tucked into his chest pocket is a folded American flag pin, faded by time, but clearly well cared for. The waitress scoffs, waving a dismissive hand. "You people always act like the world owes you something. Don't expect a handout here just because you walk funny and look like you've been through hell." The words strike like bullets, and for a moment the man whose name is Walter Grayson feels the heat of shame crawl up his neck. Not for himself, but for the world that's forgotten what he gave. Walter was a decorated master sergeant in the United States Army. 2 tours in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan. Bronze Star for valor, Purple Heart for injuries sustained, while dragging 2 of his men out of a burning Humvee under enemy fire. He never talks about that, though. He doesn't wear his service on his sleeve. He came back, retired early, and tried to live simply, quietly alone. Now he works odd jobs, fixing lawnmowers, lives in a small rented room above a garage, and most days he comes to this diner for the cheap coffee and the comfort of routine. But today the routine has betrayed him. Eyes in the diner drift toward him, some curious, some embarrassed, a few snickering behind napkins. He sees a young couple shake their heads, an older man mutter. Probably just another drunk vet, and the waitress folds her arms like she's won something. Walter doesn't argue. He simply takes the cup, leans down awkwardly to collect the broken pieces of ceramic with his bare hands, and sets them gently on the table. The jagged edge of a shard cuts his palm, but he doesn't flinch. "I'm sorry if I caused trouble," he says quietly, then pushes himself up with effort, his leg stiff, his hands unsteady. The waitress rolls her eyes and turns to walk away. "Don't come back unless you plan on being a paying customer." He stands there a moment, humiliated, unsure why today hurts more than usual. And as he turns to leave, the bell above the door jingles, and another waitress, an older woman named Judy, calls out, "Walter." "Hey, honey, you forgot your butt." She stops mid-sentence when she sees his face and the cut on his hand, and the stunned silence hanging in the air. "What happened?" she demands, her voice full of protective outrage. The younger waitress shrugs, just asking him to follow house policy. "That's all," Judy glares. "This man comes in here every morning. He pays every time. He's polite, he's kind. He fought in the war, for crying out loud." Walter tries to wave it off, but Judy's already stormed toward the back. "Don't move." She snaps, then disappears. Moments later, she returns with something wrapped in a velvet case and places it on the table where Walter had been sitting. "He never shows this to anyone," she says loud enough for the room to hear. "But maybe it's time some of you learned what real sacrifice looks like." She opens the case. Inside is a medal, the Silver Star. A hush ripples across the room. The young waitress stares, her face pale. Now, lips trembling. What? Judy cuts her off. That man pulled 3 wounded soldiers from a blown-up transport under enemy fire. They say he refused to be evacuated until every last one of his men were safe. He spent a year in rehab learning how to walk again. The waitress stammers, a single tear beginning to spill down her cheek. I didn't know. Walter turns slowly, eyes meeting hers. Not with anger, but with the quiet, calm weight of someone who has seen true horror and come back still human. You didn't ask, he says gently. That's the problem. And then without another word, he takes his case, thanks Judy with a soft squeeze of her hand, and steps out into the morning sun. Inside, the waitress breaks down sobbing into her hands, and the rest of the diner watches in silence. The young couple who had judged him now looks ashamed. The older man lowers his head, and Judy, standing behind the counter, says to no one in particular, but loud enough for all to hear, "Never assume you don't know the battles someone's already fought." From that day on, Walter's coffee was always on the house and the waitress. She started volunteering at the local VA center, trying to make amends one kindness at a time. Because in a world too quick to judge, too busy to see, it takes one quiet hero to remind us what dignity truly looks like. Weeks pass, and the little diner on the corner of Maple and Fifth begins to change in ways no one expected. Walter Grayson becomes more than just the quiet old man in the corner booth. He becomes a symbol. At first, it's just a few regulars who nod respectfully when they pass his table. Then, a small handmade sign goes up near the register. Veterans eat free. Because Freedom isn't the manager, a portly man named Rick, who used to complain about loiterers and tight margins, starts keeping a fresh pot of coffee just for Walter. Local high school students begin to notice him too, especially after Judy shares the story with a teacher whose brother had served. Soon, the story circulates far beyond the diner. A local reporter stops by one morning, sitting quietly at the counter until Walter finishes his coffee. "Sir," she says gently, "may I ask you a few questions? People need to hear your story," but Walter shakes his head, polite but firm. "The people who need to know already do," he says. "The rest? I'd rather let them judge by how I live, not what I've done." He leaves a tip the same amount every time, 5 crisp $1 bills folded neatly beneath the saucer, even though he never has to pay any more. Meanwhile, Maria, the young waitress who once insulted him, works quietly, humbly. Her attitude has shifted completely. She no longer rolls her eyes or rushes tables. She listens. She asks questions. Sometimes she sits with the veterans who come in, notebook in hand, recording their stories, trying to understand what she had once dismissed. It eats at her, the memory of that moment, the sharpness in her voice, the look on Walter's face, but she channels it into action. She organizes a fundraiser for the local VA hospital. She helps coordinate a small photo wall near the diner's back door. Photos of local veterans, including a framed one of Walter in uniform. Younger, upright, proud, standing in desert sand with his arm around 2 fellow soldiers. One morning, Walter walks in and sees the wall. He doesn't say a word. He just stands there staring at the photo, a storm of emotions flickering in his eyes. Maria approaches slowly. "I didn't know how to ask permission," she murmurs. "I just wanted people to remember." To see Walter's hand reaches up and rests lightly on the frame. "You did good," he says, his voice hoarse with something deeper than gratitude. "They were my brothers. Now they're home." The moment hangs there, quiet, powerful, sacred. Then, one autumn morning, the diner is more crowded than usual. Maria is rushing orders. Judy is refilling cups, and Rick is grumbling about parking. But everyone freezes when a line of uniformed service members enters: Air Force, Navy, Marines, Army, led by a tall woman in dress blues. They walk with purpose toward Walter's booth, where he's seated as always, stirring sugar into his coffee. The officer salutes Master Sergeant Grayson. She asks. Walter looks up. Eyebrows raised. Yes, ma'am. She pulls a folded letter from her coat. On behalf of the Department of Defense, we would like to recognize your continued impact on this community and your exemplary service. She gestures, and two young men step forward, holding a framed plaque and a flag flown over the Capitol. Your story reminded people. You reminded us, and you inspired something larger than you know. The diner erupts into applause. Cameras flash. Judy cries openly. Maria stands in the corner, hands over her mouth. Tears pouring freely. Walter says little, only smiles softly, and shakes each hand offered to him. Later, when the crowd disperses and the diner returns to normal, Maria kneels by his table. Thank you, she whispers. Walter looks at her. For what? For forgiving me. For not giving up on people like me. For reminding us what respect really looks like. Walter pats her hand. We all fall short sometimes, he says. It's what we do next that counts. From that day on, the diner became known not just for its pies or coffee, but as a place where every soldier, young or old, wounded or whole, could find a seat, a meal, and a moment of honor. And every morning, without fail, Walter Grayson sat by the window, sipping coffee with quiet dignity, watching the world finally catch up to what he had always known. Real heroes don't need to speak loudly. They simply endure until someone finally listens. But as winter settled over the town and frost began to lace the diner windows each morning, a different kind of silence crept in. One not of reverence but of worry. Walter Grayson started coming in less frequently. His usual corner booth remained empty some days, his coffee cup untouched. When he did appear, he walked slower. His leg dragged more. The lines on his face seemed deeper, his eyes dimmer, as if carrying something heavier than even memory. Maria noticed first. She began packing a small container of food every shift just in case Judy started calling his number, but it often went straight to voicemail. One Thursday, as snow gathered gently outside, Walter didn't come in at all, nor the next day, nor the one after. A sense of dread seeped into the diner like cold air under the door. On the fourth day, Maria asked Rick if she could leave early. She didn't wait for his answer. She drove across town to the address she'd managed to find scribbled in Judy's Rolodex. The garage apartment looked as quiet as a photograph. No lights, no sound, no movement behind the curtain. She knocked, waited, knocked again. Finally, a groggy voice called out, weak but clear. It's open inside. Walter sat in a threadbare chair wrapped in an army green blanket, a portable heater humming beside him. He looked smaller, somehow, sunken into the chair like a fading shadow. Didn't mean to worry you, he said, trying to smile. Just a flu, nothing serious. But Maria saw it. The unopened food in the fridge, the untouched medicine on the counter, the feverish tint in his cheeks. You're going to the hospital, she said gently, firmly. No arguments. He didn't protest. That scared her more than anything. At the VA hospital, doctors confirmed a severe respiratory infection, caught it late. One nurse said, "But you got him here just in time." Maria stayed. She brought him fresh socks, a new book, and a framed photo of the diner wall. His photo front and center, Judy visited next. Then Rick, who awkwardly left a card that simply read, "Sorry for being an ass. You're one hell of a man." Walter smiled when he read it. Miracles never cease. Days turned to weeks. As Walter healed, word of his condition spread further. Letters arrived from other states. Veterans wrote to thank him for reminding the world they still mattered. One boy sent a drawing of a soldier with a superhero cape, and the words, "Mr. Walter is my hero," written in bold crayon. But something else had been set in motion too. Inspired by Walter's story, Maria began organizing a new initiative, Project Booth. It started a small one-free table reserved in every participating diner or restaurant for any veteran who needed a warm meal and a seat. The idea caught on. Within a month, over 30 businesses in neighboring towns had signed on. By the time Walter was discharged slightly thinner, but with the same sharp glint in his eyes, the local news had aired a story about it. He returned to the diner on a bright Saturday morning, and as he stepped inside, the place erupted into applause. Customers stood. Even the cook came out wiping his hands on his apron to shake Walter's hand. Someone played the national anthem on an old jukebox, and for a moment Walter simply stood still, tears quietly welling in his eyes. "I didn't do anything special," he said softly. "I just came here for coffee and gave us back our conscience." Judy replied. Hugging him, Maria brought him to his booth where a small golden plaque had been bolted into the wood. It read, "Reserved for Walter Grayson, Master, Sergeant, Hero Friend." He sat, looked around, and chuckled. "Guess I'm stuck with this seat now." But as the diner filled with life again and conversations flowed like warmth through the cold morning, Walter's smile lingered. He watched Maria tending to a new customer in a wheelchair, watched Judy laughing at the register, and saw the walls covered in more photos than ever before. Faces of men and women once forgotten, now honored. The war had taken much from him, but in this small, unlikely place with chipped mugs and greasy menus, something had been returned his place. His voice, and above all, the truth that dignity doesn't fade with age, injury, or silence. It simply waits to be seen. Spring came early that year with sunlight melting the snow from the sidewalk in front of the diner, and a warmth returning to the town that hadn't been felt in years. Word of Walter Grayson's story had now spread far beyond their county newspapers picked it up. A national veterans organization invited him to speak. He politely declined every offer. "I've said enough." He told Maria one morning, sipping his coffee with both hands. "This place, this is my podium." But not everyone was content with silence. One afternoon, as Walter sat quietly in his usual booth, a tall man in a suit stepped inside the diner. He had a rigid posture, a pressed navy blue tie, and an expression that demanded attention. Rick raised an eyebrow. Judy looked up from the register. Maria paused mid-order. The man made his way directly to Walter and extended his hand. "Mr. Grayson, I'm Colonel Jacob Merritt, retired. I served 2 decades in Army intelligence. I've come on behalf of the Department of Veterans Affairs." Walter blinked, then shook the man's hand. "What for?" "Because this community has done something few towns have ever done. You, sir, started something meaningful. Project Booth is now in over 200 establishments across 14 states. That's because of you." Walter looked surprised. "All I did was drink coffee and keep quiet." That, Merritt said with a respectful nod, is precisely why it worked. You weren't trying to be seen. You just showed us what we'd forgotten to look at. He then pulled out a small box and laid it gently on the table. Congressional Commendation for Community Impact. He said, signed personally by the Secretary of Veterans Affairs. For a moment, Walter said nothing. His hand hovered above the box. Then he looked around the room at Maria, who wiped a tear from her cheek at Rick awkwardly, clapping near the coffee machine, and at Judy, already pulling out her camera. "I don't need medals," Walter finally said. "I've buried too many friends who had them." The colonel nodded solemnly. "I know, sir, but this one isn't for war, it's for peace, for reminding people how to be better." Walter stared down at the box a moment longer, then slowly nodded. "All right," he said softly. "But only if we hang it on the wall with the others. I'm not the only one who served. Let this one be for all of them." And so it was. The medal was framed, mounted next to the photo wall, where now more than 70 faces stared out in uniformed dignity. One frame, however, remained empty. Maria noticed it one night while closing up. A gold border, fresh and clean, but no photo inside. She asked Judy, who smiled quietly. "Walter said to leave that one open," she replied. "For the next vet we forget, so we're reminded not to." Months passed, but the energy never faded. More veterans visited the diner. Some came quietly. Others shared stories. A high school civics teacher began assigning students to visit and interview a veteran for extra credit. A little boy once approached Walter, held out a plastic toy medal from a cereal box, and said, "You can have mine too." Walter had to look away to hide the tears. Then one day, a black SUV pulled up outside. Out stepped a woman in her 30s, sharply dressed, briefcase in hand, sunglasses perched on her head. She looked out of place until she entered the diner and spotted Walter Dad. She said Walter looked up stunned. Emily, it had been nearly 10 years. The last time they'd spoken was at her college graduation before the war, before his body had broken down and the weight of everything had pushed him into silence. She rushed over, embraced him tightly. "I saw the article," she said, eyes shining. "I'm sorry I stayed away so long." Walter's voice cracked. "I'm the one who went quiet, not you." She pulled out a folded letter. "I want you to come stay with me. Just for a while. I have space a guest house, and a grandson who should know his grandfather." The diner watched silently as the war-hardened old soldier broke into a slow, trembling smile. "I'd like that," he said. When they left together the next morning, Maria walked outside to wave him off. "Don't forget your seat's waiting," she called after him. "I won't," Walter said from the window. "But now I know I've got more than one place to belong." And with that, the car pulled away. But the legacy he left behind stayed etched in the walls of the diner, in the hearts of those who sat beneath the photos, in every cup of coffee, poured without judgment. Because sometimes the most extraordinary change begins with the simplest act of decency. And one man's quiet strength had taught them all respect isn't requested. It's earned, remembered, and passed forward. A year passed. The seasons cycled again, spring into summer, then into the quiet gold of autumn. The plaque on Walter's booth remained polished weekly by Maria's own hands. People still came, still asked about the man in the photo, still lowered their voices when they sat near the wall of heroes. But Walter didn't return. Not for months. Not a call, not a letter. Maria sometimes worried, but reminded herself he was with his daughter now, living. Healing, perhaps finally finding peace after carrying a war in his bones for decades. Then, one cool November morning, just days before Veterans Day, a package arrived at the diner. Brown paper, no return address. Inside, wrapped in soft cloth, was the very first coffee cup Walter had ever used there. The one he held on the day Maria made him feel like less than human. It had a small chip on the rim. Alongside it, folded in crisp handwriting, was a note. Maria, if you're reading this, it means I've gone where my brothers went. Don't be sad. I was never meant to live forever. But I did live long enough to see the world begin to remember. And that's enough for me. I'm leaving you the cup because you helped fill it with kindness, with purpose, and with second chances. I never said it, but I forgave you the moment it happened. You were young, and you changed. That matters more than anything. Keep the booth warm, and please, when someone walks in and reminds you of me, make sure they don't have to earn your respect. Just give it. That's the world we fought for. Always Walter. Maria sat in the back booth that afternoon, cup cradled in her hands, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. She didn't speak for a long time. Neither did Judy, who simply sat beside her and rested a hand on her shoulder. That evening they held a candlelight memorial in the diner. Veterans from every surrounding county came, people who'd never even met. Walter showed up because they'd heard what he stood for. Maria read his letter aloud with a voice that trembled but never broke, and when she finished, she placed the chipped cup on the shelf above his booth, surrounded by flags, old service medals donated by guests, and a small brass plate beneath it that read, "The cup that changed us." But the story didn't end there. Inspired by Walter's impact, Maria officially registered Project Booth as a nonprofit. Its mission expanded not just free meals, but emergency support housing referrals, mental health outreach. She stepped into a role she never imagined for herself, an advocate, a protector, a voice for those who had been silent too long. One stormy night, long after closing, a young man in a damp hoodie wandered into the diner. He had a military duffel slung over his back, a haunted look in his eyes, and a limp that told a familiar story. Maria didn't ask questions. She guided him to the corner booth, Walter's booth. She poured him coffee in a clean cup, then hesitated and pulled down the chipped one instead. Placed it gently in front of him. The young man looked up. "Is this seat taken?" Maria smiled. "It's reserved for people just like you." Because Walter Grayson may have left this world quietly, but in every corner of that diner, in every meal served with compassion, and every act of grace given without hesitation, his legacy lived on, stronger than medals, louder than parades, and deeper than any wound. The soldier who asked for nothing had given them everything. Years passed. The diner changed hands, but the soul of it remained untouched. The floors were polished. The booths reupholstered, the menu modernized. But in the far right corner by the window, Walter Grayson's booth stayed exactly as it had always been. The plaque was never removed. The chipped cup remained untouched on its shelf, now housed in a small glass case with a soft spotlight that glowed gently even after hours. Locals brought their children to see it, pointing at the black and white photo of Walter in uniform and whispering stories of kindness, courage, and quiet strength. The wall of veterans had now grown into an entire hallway, framed photographs stretching across the back corridor like a timeline of forgotten valor. They called it the Walk of Honor. Maria, now a few years older, had taken full ownership of the diner. She'd turned the second floor into a transitional housing space for homeless veterans. 8 beds, warm meals, counseling, and a small library that bore Walter's name. The Grayson Room. It became a refuge, a place where no one was judged by their clothes, their scars, or the ghosts in their eyes. In that space, Walter lived on. One rainy night, just after closing, Maria sat alone at the counter reviewing paperwork, when a soft knock echoed from the glass door. She looked up, puzzled. Outside stood a boy, maybe 13 or 14, soaked to the bone, a school backpack clutched to his chest. He looked lost. She opened the door without hesitation. "You all right, sweetheart?" she asked. The boy hesitated, then held out a folded piece of paper. "Are you Miss Maria?" "My grandma said if I ever felt like giving up, I should come here. She said you helped her once. Her name was Evelyn. She used to wait tables with you. She said you changed after a man sat in that booth and didn't yell at you even when he should have." Maria's heart clenched. Evelyn. It had been so long. She took the paper gently. It was a drawing, crayon. A picture of an old man with a kind face sitting with a coffee cup surrounded by hearts and tiny flags. At the top were 3 words. "Thank you, Walter." Maria knelt down and hugged the boy tightly. "You're safe here. You always will be." That night, she let him sleep in the Grayson room. The next morning, she sat him at Walter's booth and poured him hot cocoa into the chipped cup just once, just for him. Because it wasn't about the cup, the booth, or even the man anymore. It was about what he awakened in them, the understanding that compassion is not a grand gesture, but a quiet choice made again and again. The boy would go on to visit often. He'd ask about Walter, about the soldiers on the wall, about the meaning of the medals. And every time Maria would tell the story from the beginning of the day. A waitress raised her voice at a tired old man, of how he said nothing in anger, but everything in dignity, of how he left behind a town better than he found it. The story never grew old. Eventually, the boy would grow up and join the military himself, not for glory, not for praise, but because he had once sat in the shadow of a hero and knew what it meant to serve quietly. When he graduated boot camp, he sent a letter addressed to Walter's diner. Inside was a photo of him in uniform, standing at attention with a small note that read, "I will fill the booth now. Thank you for saving me, before I even knew I needed saving." Maria framed the photo and placed it on the walk of honor. The hallway now reached the kitchen door. Walter Grayson had become more than a man. He had become a compass, a reminder, a legacy etched not into stone, but into the hearts of those who chose kindness over cruelty, humility over pride, and service over self. And long after everyone who remembered him had gone, the booth remained. The cup remained. And the door never locked for those who came in from the storm. And then came the day none of them expected the day. Walter Grayson's name echoed through the chambers of Congress. It began with a single social media post. A traveling journalist passing through town stopped at the diner, heard Walter's story from Maria, and took a photo of the chipped coffee cup with the caption, "One man, one seat." A legacy of quiet heroism that changed lives without making a sound. The post went viral in a matter of hours. It reached veterans' networks, military families, national advocacy groups, and eventually the inbox of a congresswoman named Elaine Rowe, herself the daughter of a Korean war vet. She made one call to Mariah, then another to the Department of Defense, and within a month Walter's story was scheduled to be read on the House floor as part of a bipartisan resolution recognizing overlooked community heroes, those who served not just in war, but in peace, shaping the soul of the nation in unseen ways. The announcement arrived by certified letter. You are invited to attend the formal recognition of Master Sergeant Walter Grayson, posthumously honored by the United States Congress for Community Valor. Maria held the letter with shaking hands. Her knees buckled, and Judy had to ease her into a chair. He never wanted attention, Maria whispered. He would have hated this. Judy smiled through misty eyes. He didn't want attention, but he deserved the nation's thanks. He already had ours. A few weeks later, Maria stood in the visitors' gallery of the U.S. Capitol, dressed in navy blue with a single flag pin over her heart. The speaker read Walter's name with solemn dignity, recounting the full story from the insult in a small-town diner to the creation of Project Booth, to the lives saved the soldiers, housed the child who found a path, because Walter had left a light on in the dark. As the chamber gave a standing ovation, Maria wept not for sorrow, but for justice, finally spoken aloud. Upon returning to the diner, she found a line wrapped around the block. Veterans and strangers alike, many in uniform, others in civilian clothes with scars and stories of their own. Each came not for food, but to sit just for a moment in Walter's booth. Maria let them, one by one she poured them coffee, and every time she served someone new, she whispered the same words. He saw you before the world did. Welcome home. Soon after, a museum representative called, requesting the chipped cup for permanent display in the Smithsonian's new Hall of American Heroes. Maria hesitated. She thought about Walter, how he would scoff at such a thing. But then she thought about that boy, soaked and trembling, who had walked in with nothing but a crayon drawing and hope in his eyes. She thought about how much bigger the legacy had become, so she agreed on one condition. There must always be a plaque next to it that says, "Let this cup remind you. Dignity is owed, not earned." The museum accepted. And when the exhibit opened, Walter's booth was recreated in stunning detail, right down to the sunlight that streamed through the imagined window. People stood in silence. Many cried, school groups visited, learning not just about the wars but about the warriors who came back home quietly, carrying the weight of a grateful nation. Back at the real diner, Maria replaced the empty spot where the cup had once rested with something new. A small book, leather-bound, labeled simply, "The Grayson Journal Inside," were handwritten notes from anyone who wanted to share a memory. A thank you, a promise to be better. Pages filled quickly. Strangers left pages torn from their own diaries. Children drew pictures. Soldiers wrote in block letters. Mothers left prayers. One day, as Maria flipped through its growing pages, she paused on an entry that stopped her cold. It was dated 2 days prior. No name. Just this: "I came to this booth hoping to be invisible, but instead I was seen. Thank you, Walter. I'm still alive today, because you reminded this place how to care." She closed the book with reverence, pressed her palm to the cover, and turned toward the window where light poured in, golden and soft across the booth. Dust sparkled in the sunbeam. The room was quiet, sacred still. Somewhere, perhaps in a place far beyond the stars, a humble soldier smiled. The diner had become more than just a place to eat. It was a sanctuary, a living monument wrapped in the scent of coffee and the hum of whispered stories. Years continued to pass, and the town itself changed. New buildings rose, old ones were torn down. Young faces filled the streets where Walter Grayson once limped quietly across cracked sidewalks. But the booth remained. The walk of honor extended across both walls. Now, veterans, old and young, came to find their photo there to see they hadn't been forgotten. And every November 11th, the line outside the diner began forming before dawn. Then, one Veterans Day, a black car pulled up again. Not sleek like before, but government-issued. From it stepped a sharply dressed woman in a crisp Air Force uniform with silver streaks in her dark hair. She entered quietly, her polished shoes echoing on the tiled floor, and approached the counter where Maria, older, now still stood with that familiar warmth in her eyes. "Can I help you?" Colonel Maria asked kindly, wiping her hands on her apron. The woman smiled. "Actually, I think I'm here to help you. My name is Elise Grayson. Walter was my grandfather." Maria froze. Her breath caught in her chest. "Your grandfather." "Yes, ma'am. I was born 2 years after he passed. But my mother, his daughter, told me everything I've read. Every article visited the Smithsonian. Even sat in the replica booth." Elise's eyes welled slightly. "But I never came here. Until now." Maria stepped out from behind the counter, embraced her without a word, and whispered, "He would have loved to meet you." Elise smiled through her tears. "I think he already did. In every letter, in every stranger who told me how he changed their life." She looked around the diner. "This place, it's like walking into his soul." After a moment, Maria gestured gently toward the booth. "Would you like to sit there?" Elise hesitated, then shook her head. "I think I'd like to stand for just a moment so others can sit, just like he did." She reached into her jacket and pulled out a thin metal box. Inside, folded neatly beneath a velvet cloth, was a new medal. The Grayson Community Valor Award, newly approved by the Department of Defense, and named in Walter's honor, created to recognize civilians and veterans who uphold the values he lived by. She placed the medal on the shelf beside the journal and turned to Maria. "Every year one person will receive this, but it starts here with you." Maria blinked. "Me. You saw his worth when the world didn't. You built this sanctuary, you honored him, and made sure others were honored too. That's what this medal is about. Not war, not rank, just humanity." Maria took the medal with shaking hands. "I don't deserve this," she whispered. "Yes, you do," Elise said gently. "Because of you, his legacy didn't end, it multiplied." That evening, they added one more plaque beside the journal above the medal beneath the golden light. "Let this be a place where silence is broken by kindness, where every name is remembered, and where legacy isn't left behind, it is passed forward." And so it was. New faces came. New stories filled the pages. The booth remained not as a shrine to one man, but as a starting place for everyone who had ever felt invisible. People still sat there when they needed to feel seen. Soldiers, widows, students, wanderers. Each left something behind: a word, a promise, a piece of themselves. And somewhere far away on a quiet hill under a folded flag, Walter Grayson rested. Not forgotten, not lost, but ever present in every hand that poured a cup of coffee, with compassion in every person who chose dignity over dismissal, in every heart that decided to sit just once before, standing tall for someone else. As the years rolled forward, the world continued to change. But one thing never did: the quiet booth by the window, bathed in sunlight, always waiting for someone who needed it. Walter Grayson's story, once a whisper in a small-town diner, had become a flame that lit torches across the country. His name was etched not in granite monuments, but in lives transformed by grace in every act of respect offered without request. Generations of soldiers, students, and strangers would walk through that door and find more than a meal they found dignity, because Walter taught them something timeless. Real heroism doesn't shout. It listens. It shows up, it stays, and long after his last step faded, his legacy marched on in every cup poured, every seat offered, and every human heart reminded that kindness is the greatest honor we can give. If this story touched your heart, don't let it end here. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful emotional stories that honor the unsung heroes around us. Leave a comment below. Tell us how this story moved you, or share a moment when someone's quiet strength changed your life. And don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss a story that matters. Together, let's make sure stories like Walter's are never forgotten. Thank you for watching, and thank you for remembering.